When it comes to horse racing, you can never have too much information. With Twin Spires, you can place your bets with confidence, whether you use handicapping insights like our Brisnet speed ratings, prime power and past performances, the guidance of our experts' top picks, or just choose a name that catches your eye. Yes! No matter how you pick your horse, bet with Twin Spires. And now you can share the thrill with friends using our exclusive Bet Share feature.
Welcome, everybody, to another edition of the Racing Roundtable presented by Twin Spires. Darren Zocali here, filling in for Ashley Anderson this week, joined by Nick Tamaro and Vance Hansen to take a look back at what was a spectacular weekend of racing at Saratoga, featuring, of course, the Belmont Stakes. We'll touch on the Belmont. We'll also talk about our thoughts on where the three-year-old championship lies at the midway point of the season. We'll circle back to that following our Belmont discussion. We'll also touch on Thorpedo Anna, who doubled up in the Acorn Stakes. She's undeniably the leader of the three-year-old filly division. She's going to be sticking with the fillies for now. We'll give some thoughts on that. And we'll also briefly talk about what else caught our eye this past weekend, especially looking at Saratoga. But, gentlemen, obviously the conversation starts with the Belmont Stakes, the 2024 Triple Crown. It's officially in the history books, and it was a unique Triple Crown for a variety of reasons. Obviously, the Belmont being run at 1.25 miles at Saratoga for the first time. We had a matchup of the Kentucky Derby winner and the Preakness winner in the Belmont Stakes for the first time since 2013. Neither of those horses got the job done. Same result as 2013, actually. Kind of muddied the picture of the three-year-old championship a little bit more. Dornoch got the job done. And Nick, I'll start with you. Dornoch came into the race, a horse that a bit polarizing. He was a great 2-year-old. He had a winning debut effort in the Fountain of Youth, but it was a watered-down Fountain of Youth where he wasn't all that visually impressive. Relegated to some off-the-pace tactics to try something different in the Bluegrass, completely compromised and wiped out at a variety of different points of the Derby, and then bounced back with what was undeniably the best effort of his career in the Belmont Stakes. Your impressions of Dornoch's victory on Saturday?
Yeah, I'll certainly say it caught me by surprise, right? I did not expect that. I did not expect him to be ready to take a step forward, because that's really what he hadn't done in 3 prior starts as a 3-year-old. And I think that was what we all were kind of holding against him, because we'd also seen it from his trainer before, having talented 2-year-olds that just didn't really take a step forward at 3. I'm glad that they were smart enough to go back to the tactics that work best, which is getting him firmly involved in the pace. He's a horse who wants to be forward. He wants to be involved. And, he had the edge of being a little bit fresher coming in than horses like Seize the Grey and Mystic Dan did, who did go through. Mystic Dan went through every bit of the rigors of the Triple Crown, and Seize the Grey was making, I want to say, his 5th start in 12 weeks. It was a really large number. And so, he caught a lot of these horses at the right time and was able to produce a very strong effort. So a solid and deserving winner, but one that certainly caught me by surprise.
Yeah, Vance, Dornoch pushed a rather quick pace through an opening quarter, kind of settled down in the half. Stalk Seize the Grey, overtook him, and then held off Mindframe, who kind of wandered throughout the stretch. Your impressions of the victory, and especially that stretch drive?
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot more to add to what Nick said. Like he said, he was coming in with a lot to prove in this race, and he did get the right trip. I think the track profile was somewhat speed favoring, I suppose, on Saturday, or at least a lot of opposing horsemen thought so. So he benefited from that. And also, Mindframe probably ran the best race of all, considering his relative inexperience. Nick mentioned the fact that he was kind of shying out in the stretch from the urgings of his jockey. If he had maintained a straight course, perhaps he would have won the race, if not gotten a little closer. And then, of course, Sierra Leone had another trip that wasn't very ideal and wasn't very good from his perspective. So a lot of things worked in Dornoch's favor on Saturday, but he did step it up at the right time, and he might be a 3-year-old to watch for this summer.
Yeah, some great still photographs there of Dornoch as he came down the stretch and hit the finish line in front of Mindframe. Nick, Vance brought up Mindframe, probably running the best race of all, showing some greenness, obviously, in the stretch. Fierceness going into this race was probably by many considered to be still the most talented runner, although somewhat, you never know what you're going to get with him. Mindframe in his third lifetime start stretched out to 1.25 miles after 2 blowout victories and ran a spectacular race in defeat. How do you think he stacks up against this 3-year-old division after that runner-up try?
Quite well, to be perfectly honest. I think he's clearly now in the upper echelon of 3-year-olds. This was a big class test, and it was a distance test as well, with him going 3/16 of a mile farther than he had at any point before. And I thought he passed the test. You know, he didn't win, but sometimes you're allowed to lose. People forget that it's okay to run a winning race in a losing effort. It still happens, and I think we'll touch on a similar topic a little bit later. So, yeah, I would say Mindframe looks like one of the, I don't know, of active horses right now, the top 3, 4, 5 at most, and I would expect him to be a major player for the Travers. I think that his issues down the stretch likely had a lot to do with being tired. Irad flagged him once left-handed and got no big response. He did it again and he really veered out. And generally, that's more for – this is a horse that – I mean, I understand he was making only his third career start, but he had been very professional in 2 prior starts. It's not like he was Sierra Leone or somebody that, you know, that lays all over the field or staggers home like a Bourbon Street regular or something. But, you know, this is a horse that had been much more polished. I think he was tired, right? I think he veered out because he was tired, which he was totally entitled to be. There's no great amount of certainty that 1.25 miles is exactly what he wants. He might end up being most effective at a little bit shorter distance. So he figures to gain the most from this, right? I mean, that's kind of the book on him, is that he rates to really move forward off of this. And so I'm very excited to see where he lands next, and if we're going to even see his stablemate Fierceness back at some point. But, you know, if they divide and conquer and Mindframe goes to the Jim Dandy and we see Fierceness in the Haskell, it'll certainly give Mike Rapoli a 1-2 punch that many would envy.
No question about that. Vance, Nick touched on Sierra Leone. I'm going to group the third and fourth place finishers together just because of their running styles. 2 horses that obviously are talented, but routinely they are compromised by whether it be pace, whether it be circumstance of trip. Sierra Leone might be the most talented runner of the 3-year-olds. We don't know at this point. But he's starting to look like one of those horses that needs nearly everything to go right in order to win at this level. And we've seen those quite often throughout the years. Is that your impression of him, where he's going to need the absolute picture-perfect setup in order to beat the top flight 3-year-olds in a major Grade 1?
Yeah, seemingly, and of course he had a terrible start in the Belmont too, and that set him back a number of lengths. And then the bump at the top of the stretch kind of stalled his momentum just a little bit. But he still had a lot to do in that final quarter mile, even if he hadn't gotten that nudge from the rival. And so, yeah, increasingly it does look like that he's going to need a lot of help up front and during the course of a race to establish himself as the top 3-year-old in this class, and the same with Honor Marie too. This is just kind of a thing that deep closers always have to deal with in races of this stature.
The good news for them, Nick, is that on June 11th, as we're recording this live, they all kind of have a blank slate. We've had 8 Grade 1 races in the 3-year-old division. We've had 8 different winners at this point. So it really comes down to, in the Haskell and in the Travers and moving forward into the fall and the Breeders' Cup, who steps up. It's anybody's race, no pun intended at this point. But if you had to place a wager on who would come out as 3-year-old champion, who would you place a wager on?
You know, boy, that's a good one, right? You feel like the highest likelihood is that they're going to probably get a forward move from a horse like Mindframe. But I also am always skeptical of horses that make heavily delayed 3-year-old debuts and then get a lot thrown at them in a relatively short period of time. You know, I still think one of the better talents in the crop is Sierra Leone. He makes his own trouble. He's got a very unattractive running style, which I think Vance was more or less going over when it comes to American dirt racing, just because he's going to need so many things to go his way. You know, I guess I would still – I give you a very tepid answer of Mystic Dan. And I mean, I have no great amount of confidence in that. I just don't see Sierra Leone taking the step forward. I don't really see Dornoch duplicating what we saw on Saturday. And I think Mindframe comes from such a deficit that, you know, he would have to really take a step forward. I also am of the opinion that we're never going to see Fierceness again. So he has not worked since May 24th. I do not think that that's by design. His last workout was not good. And so if we get fierceness back, I would put him in the conversation as well, because he's a horse with the kind of running style where he can be adaptable anywhere. I have no knowledge of any of this. I am no journalist. I'm just a horse player that gets listened to, hopefully not that often. So I have no knowledge of it. That's just my belief at this point. I don't think you would take what would seemingly be a healthy 3-year-old and work him once and then leave him off for a few weeks before you get him started again.
Yeah, Nick Tamaro's views do not reflect those of Todd Pletcher. We'll
Correct. Nor Twin Spires, for that matter.
Vance, I'll present the same question to you, and also being such a fan of international racing, we'll also mention the fact that a potential returner Forever Young for the Breeders' Cup Classic. Now, he can't win 3-year-old championship, I would say, but of all the 3-year-olds, if he shows up in the Classic and campaigns in Japan and continues to look like the Forever Young we know, you would give him as good a chance as any.
Quite possibly, and of course, City of Troy, I hear today, is being pointed for the Breeders' Cup Classic after 2 more starts in England and Ireland. So he's going to potentially be a horse to consider as well in the Breeders' Cup. I'm not a few. You presented, Nick, the futures wager hypothetical, and this is a contest I don't think I would be comfortable wagering any money on who's going to be a champion 3-year-old at this point. But I will say, being a voter, if the polls close today, I would probably give the slight edge to Sierra Leone just because of his consistency, his 2 pre-Derby victories, ran a virtually winning race in the Derby, and then just had some trouble in the Belmont. So I think he's still probably the slight pro tem leader at this point, but he's definitely got some work to do and another win or 2 needed, I think, to cement this championship.
Well, there's no slight leader in the 3-year-old filly division. That is Thorpedo Anna's race to lose at this point. A spectacular run in the Kentucky Oaks, followed up with another dominant performance in the Acorn Stakes, where she validated that victory, showing it wasn't the sloppy track. It wasn't anything that had to do with anything other than right now she's just the best 3-year-old filly. Been announced that they're going to point her towards the Coaching Club America Oaks in the Alabama throughout the summer at Saratoga. Nick, your thoughts on where she stacks up in terms of this 3-year-old crop, and at some point, would you like to see Thorpedo Anna face this 3-year-old Colton Gelding group?
Yeah, she's terrific, right? She's really outstanding. I mean, her record is basically flawless. Her 3-year-old performances have now all been sensational. She followed up a huge Oaks win with an even easier Acorn win. I mean, that still image right there captures it, right? Ears up for the photo, and she had it well in hand by that point. So I think we're actually helped in the long run by the fact that Kenny McPeek has Mystic Dan as well, because if you're going to run her against males, you have myriad opportunities in the fall and later in the year when they've sort of sorted themselves out a little bit more. I'll be honest, though, guys, I don't get the whole runner against males fascination. Like, it just doesn't do anything for me. It doesn't, other than if you're going to embark on a really ambitious campaign like a Rachel Alexandra type, then I don't see the importance of running once against males. Like, so let's say she just demolishes the field in the Coaching Club American Oaks. We see some attrition in the 3-year-old ranks. Mystic Dan, which hopefully he doesn't, has some issue that keeps him from there. And McPeek decides, great, I'm going to run her in the Travers. I mean, that'd be cool. Right. It'd be really fun. It'd be really fun to see. The 1.25 miles would be a new test for her. Doesn't look like it would be an issue, despite her having a pedigree that really doesn't make you think she wants to go beyond, 7/8. But it would be fun. It would be a curiosity. McPeek's been ambitious in the past. We saw this happen with Swiss Skydiver. And looking back on it, it's like, yeah, Swiss Skydiver beat Authentic. That was awesome. And then a month later, she lost the Breeders' Cup Distaff and was pretty much never the same. So, she ran really hard in a really short period of time. So again, without ranting about it, I don't really love the whole fascination with running them against males. Let's appreciate Thorpedo Anna going out there and winning a lot of really meaningful races in the second half of the year, like the Coaching Club American Oaks and the Alabama, because I can tell you one thing, we've not seen a 3-year-old filly that can come anywhere close to keeping up with her when she's on her game. I mean, of the horses she's beaten already, which she's beaten everyone and anybody else that's out there, she is the boss by a mile.
Yeah, she completely inhaled Just FYI and spit her out at the top of the stretch and just leveled off very professionally. Head of the class right now, Vance. I tend to agree with Nick. If you're going to run in the Preakness, the Belmont Stakes, gave us great moments with Rachel Alexandra. Of course, the Rags to Riches '07 Belmont was a spectacular moment in racing as well. I don't need to see her win by 5 in the Pennsylvania Derby, though, come September. I agree with Nick's particular viewpoint there. What's your take on it, Vance?
Well, I first of all, I thought it was kind of interesting that after the Acorn, Kenny McPeak was kind of basically saying, "I wonder if I ran her in the wrong race," alluding to the Belmont Stakes, and then basically 48 hours later, he's kind of dismissing the chance to run her in the Haskell in her next start, and instead just pointing towards the Coaching Club American Oaks in Alabama. So I just kind of thought that was kind of odd. Basically, I think the reason to put her in a race against males is, first of all, she's basically run out of competition at this point in the 3-year-old filly ranks. And I think if you've got a once in a decade type filly, perhaps like this is, uh, you want to perhaps make a little history with her. Um, I, I've always liked the fact when top class fillies like this, whether they're 3-year-olds or older horses, take their shot against males. And we've been delighted by horses like Zenyatta in the past, Rachel Alexandra, Beholder winning the Pacific Classic, and really that's the only way for in my opinion, for this filly to legitimately be a Horse of the Year candidate is to start taking on males. So. Sticking in the 3-year-old filly ranks and then finally facing Idiomatic in the Breeders' Cup Distaff, even if she were to win the Distaff over Idiomatic, as a voter, as a traditional voter for me, just wouldn't do anything as far as her Horse of the Year candidacy. So I kind of appreciate the fact that McPeak was perhaps looking at possible Horse of the Year candidacy last week, but now he's kind of backed off on that. And so I guess we'll just have to settle for her running against 3-year-old fillies and perhaps dominating them more over the next couple of months before she steps up either against older mares or possibly going against the colts later in the fall.
Nick, the Horse of the Year conversation usually often comes down to the older horse division, which I guess taking a big step forward this past weekend was National Treasure with his tremendous victory in the Met Mile. He's now got open road, potentially heading through the Breeders' Cup Classic as the leader of that division. Your take on his performance and his prospects going forward?
Yeah, I mean, it was a compact field, obviously a quirky mile layout as well with the Wilson Chute in play for these couple of Belmonts to be run at Saratoga, at least a couple. But I thought he was sensational, right? I thought he was very, very good, very polished. Clearly a horse that it's funny. I thought it was really interesting, especially given his connections, that he seemed to toil as much as he did in the middle part of last year when they got him away from what was his preferred running style. And, he was rated a couple of times and it was like, that's not really the horse that we've seen to be competent. He needs the lead. He needs to be engaged. If he's not on it, if he's not making it, he needs to be on it, so to speak, as in stalking. And, when they drew the post and he had the inside post and Hoist the Gold was obviously going to be outside, it was pretty clear that he was either going to go to the lead and have Hoist the Gold hound him and eventually spit him out, or he was going to let Hoist the Gold go in front of him and then set up outside. I love how decisive Flavian Pratt was out of the gate, and I thought it was a tour de force. This is a very, very solid horse. And right now, the leader in the clubhouse, both for Horse of the Year and Best Older Male. I think the 1.25 miles is really the biggest question. Ultimately, does he want to go that far? I know he's a Preakness winner at 1 mile and 3/16. That was a long time ago, and that was Blazing Sevens that he was holding off down the stretch. So it's a bit of a different animal when we're talking about some talented 3-year-olds and some older horses like First Mission and a couple that we'll see in the Foster in a few weeks that will really give us a line on it. But right now, to me, it's National Treasure and everybody else, at least in that miler type portion of the Classic division.
Vance, I know a performance that caught your eye was from Cogburn, who had a spectacular effort and is without question the leader of the turf sprint division. He exploded through the stretch, was a dominant winner. When you win turf sprints by as much as he won by, that's something you don't normally see, because those races you see blanket finishes, you see horses closing through fast fractions that are chewing up ground late to narrow the margin. That is an effort that I don't really know if some people appreciate just how unbelievably dominant he was.
Yeah, and the most remarkable thing, I think, is when we all looked at the teletimer after the race. I didn't think it was I thought it was virtually impossible to run 5.5 furlongs in under 1 minute, but he was the first one in American racing history basically to do so. And I don't know what kind of a run up they have in 5.5 furlong turf sprints at Saratoga, but regardless, I mean, Cogburn has turned himself into possibly a once in a decade, once in a generation type grass sprint talent. And Steve Asmussen, of course, has had a Midas touch with sprinters in the past, mostly on the main track, but now he's got one of the fastest animals, sprint type animals in the world. And it should be a lot of fun watching him later this summer and fall. He's probably going to get two prep races in before the Breeders' Cup at Del Mar. He'll probably go for a title defense in the Troy at Saratoga. And then they're going to run him again in the Kentucky Downs Turf Sprint. Now, that's the only turf sprint that he's lost in his career. He lost by less than a length last year in that race, but it possibly might not be the kind of course that suits him the best. So I kind of question whether that might be the right move or not, but got to give him, given the fact that it is a $2 million race and there just aren't that many $2 million turf races in which he's going to be competitive in this country. So you can't fault them for trying it again in September. But yeah, Cogburn is just an unbelievable talent at what he does.
Yeah, I'll throw this one back to you, Vance. Again, given how much you follow international racing, obviously not this year because of the timing, but if he continues at this level, is he a potential Royal Ascot type horse for next year?
He would be very interesting to send him over there for the King Charles III 5 furlongs. I think that would suit him quite well, and it probably plays more to a 5.5 furlong type, given some of the undulations on that particular course. So yeah, I think Cogburn would fit quite well in some of the major international turf sprints, and that also includes Dubai.
Speaking of Dubai, well, a horse that I wanted to take a look at actually came back from Saudi Arabia. Bookham Dano really caught my eye with his effort in the Woody Stevens. He chased a pretty quick pace. Well, I'll call it a very quick pace, where he made an early move into it, opened up, and held off a very nice horse in Prince of Monaco, who was definitely compromised at the start and was left with a lot to do. But I can make the argument that sometimes a bad start in a race that goes that quick early might actually be a bit of a blessing in disguise, because Prince of Monaco had a furious pace to close into. Bookham Dano made a very early aggressive move into it. He opened up and he held on. His one blemish this year was a nose loss to Forever Young going a one-turn mile in Saudi Arabia. I thought this was a tremendous performance by him. I think coming out of this race going forward, he could be the preeminent 3-year-old sprinter and potentially lead up to a try. We'll see if he cuts back to 6 furlongs or goes to the dirt mile type of a scenario come the Breeders' Cup. But I've been very impressed with this horse, how he's developed. He started out the year great. He put up another monstrous effort after shipping in from Saudi Arabia. And I'm not quite sure, Nick, that there are a lot of people out there who really give this horse enough credit for how talented he is.
No, I totally agree. I mean, he's been remarkably consistent as well. And, there was, I think the important thing to remember about this race, and you mentioned it, in the first portion of what you said, is that, I mean, this was an insane pace. I've never seen them come remotely close to going as fast as they did. I mean, they were gapped out by 20 lengths down the backstretch. I've never seen a half mile split at Saratoga at 7 furlongs around 43. I mean, they almost shaded 43. They were flying through the opening half mile of that race. And you know what? Bookham Dano was never really that far off of it. He was 6-7 lengths off early, but I mean, the horses who were most effective in that race were way farther back than that. So I thought he ran very well. That was at 7/8 as well. He feels like a horse who will be equally as effective, maybe if not a little bit more at 6 furlongs. So yeah, really, and really, I'll tell you what, guys, hats off to his connections, right? I mean, we all love the Kentucky Derby. We don't have to say that because we're all compensated in some fashion by CDI, but it doesn't hurt. All kidding aside, I mean, we love the Kentucky Derby. We love the lead up to it. The Derby's the greatest race run in the world, in my opinion. But sometimes you have horses that just aren't Derby horses, right? And the good thing about that is when connections recognize it, they can really benefit from it. This is a horse who would have potentially gone through the rigors of the Triple Crown Trail and really been worse off for it, and instead was able to run in the right races, even take a trip to Saudi, come back, run the best race of his career, and I think the sky's the limit potential-wise. I'm a big fan of this horse, in case you can't tell.
Yeah, Vance, you have to imagine he's going to head to the Allen Jerkins, and then we'll see where he goes to in the fall. But yeah, I completely agree with Nick said. The first and second place finishers in that race ran last and next to last after setting torrid fractions. And this was at that point of the day, Vance. You talked about the possibility that track was a bit playing kinder to speed. Chad Brown was noted as saying that he was actually in the middle of the card talking about essentially being pretty upset with how the track was playing and the prospects of how it impacted Sierra Leone. Definitely helped him with randomized, but definitely might have hurt him with Sierra Leone. But it was at the point of the day where it seemed like that was the hype, the talk of the track. And then you had two jockeys who tried to grab that speed bias by the throat and might have done a little bit of overkill there. But but Bookham Dano, Vance, I think is just a very exciting 3-year-old sprinter.
He is, and I echo completely what Nick said. You got to observe the horse early in the season, 3-year-old especially, recognize what he's best at, and even if it's not a classic type, there's plenty of big races, a lot of money to be won in this sprinter division, up to a mile even. He could stretch out and be a Met Mile type by next year. Who knows? I mean, he's obviously got the winning experience at Saratoga. Met Mile will be back there again next year. So, yeah, I totally agree with what you guys have said. And a very exciting 3-year-old. Hopefully he will show up in the Breeders' Cup Sprint. He's got a lot of opportunities to test out his prowess against older horses after the Allen Jerkins, got the Vosburg, you got the Phoenix at Keeneland. So exciting prospect for sure.
We'll bring it full circle. We started the conversation talking about the 3-year-old championship, 8 grade ones, 8 different winners. One of those horses is now Bookham Dano. Let's just say, for argument's sake, that the other 3-year-olds continue to just kind of beat each other. Nobody takes hold of it. Nobody has multiple grade ones. An older horse wins the Breeders' Cup Classic. Bookham Dano goes in, is a 3 or a 4-time grade 1 winner, potentially wins a Breeders' Cup. Can he win the 3-year-old championship without ever going 2 turns?
It's never happened before, to the best of my knowledge. So it depends on how many traditionalists there still are left in the Eclipse Award roll call of voters. I'm not being one of them, so even if Bookham Dano were to run the table, so to speak, it would be very hard for me to put down his name in a category other than as champion sprinter.
Nick, I see you nodding in agreement.
Yeah, I think, I was trying to think about it as you were going over it, and I thought, what if a horse won a bunch of turf races, routes, the Belmont Derby, it potentially won a Breeders' Cup race as well. It doesn't really look like we have one of those, but that would be more believable than a sprinter to me, a horse that maybe did it on the turf as opposed to the dirt. Look, if he keeps racking up wins, then it's going to be a compelling case. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, I probably see exactly Vance's opinion being the collective opinion, which is that, he'll win the champion sprint award, which he would certainly deserve. And I think there are enough horses out there that have banged on the door. A lot of those grade 1 winners also have graded stake wins in addition. Sierra Leone obviously has a grade 2 and a grade 1, and so does Mystic Dan. He has a grade 3 and a grade 1. So, we've seen a little bit of that. So I think that's probably how it would end up. But, I would love for it to get to a point where Bookham Dano can make that case.
Yeah, it's always fun when we have those types of debates at the end of the year where we can make those types of decisions based on past performances, sound logic, and have those types of conversations. It makes the end of the year a lot more interesting. Triple Crown 2024 is in the book. We're officially on the road to the Breeders' Cup 5 months from now. Plenty of exciting racing that we'll get to look back on here on the Racing Roundtable in the weeks to come. And, of course, on the jury on Thursdays as we give a look ahead to some of our best bets, our best fades, as well as some other topics we want to discuss. For Nick Tamaro and Vance Hansen, this is DZ signing off. Thanks so much for joining us on the Racing Roundtable. Come back for the jury on Thursday, and we'll be back with another edition of the Racing Roundtable presented by Twin Spires next week.